Hi everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Delighted on this episode to be talking with comics creator Memo. And Memo, I think you're in a different part of the world that I'm in, so you're actually in like the future. Is this correct?
Yes, it is currently Sunday here in New Zealand.
Yes, and
So,
I am living in the eastern United States where it's still currently Saturday night. So I'm hoping it's a bright future and not a YA dystopia there.
um, I mean, depending on your opinion on the current news.
True, true. That might
Yeah.
be more the case where
Yeah.
I am, uh,
Yeah.
perhaps. But
Yeah.
yeah, very appropriate
But
as we're talking about Dominion.
yes, yeah, it's so yeah, my series Dominion is a YA fantasy romance. Um, and of course, I kind of craft this world that's got this kind of insidious, corrupt underbelly, which I
Mhm.
guess you could align to real life in some ways. I'm hoping it's more fantasy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, love it,
Yeah.
love it.
So,
I'm a big
yeah.
fan of fantasy and science fiction, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. It's I've always been such a big fan of the fantasy genre. And I'd known ever since I was little I wanted to make a comic. So finally getting the idea was the hard part though, where I would sit and be like, what, because you have to be really almost hyper fixated and like it's comics is a profession that leans into just obsession, I think. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, because you have to draw the same thing over and over and over and over again. Um, and so I kind of saw like I was aware of that. It was like I knew I wanted to make a comic, but I knew it had to be something that I would have the appetite to sit and work and do the same characters over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And I finally got the idea for that. Here in New Zealand, we had a long COVID lockdown, so we had like a short one, and then life was normal for like a year, which I think was better than a lot of the world got.
Hmm.
But then we had a long lockdown in 2021. And being indoors, and I'd already been playing with the idea for a good amount of time, and it was just, I had no better opportunity than to just sit and work on it during that lockdown. So, yeah.
Yeah. One wonderful way to make the most of an unfortunate and wild time. I'm
Yeah.
curious how many times you kind of started and went through, like, as far as the creative process, you mentioned that you'd been down a couple of paths before. Was it something that took a few drafts, a few pieces to come together?
Well, I guess it's more so it's my day job is a graphic designer, and I knew I wanted to initially I wanted to go into animation, and then I was like I was kind of told like there's no you can't make a career in animation, that's too hard. I was like, all right, well, okay. So I ended up going into graphic design to and I appreciate it because what graphic design does for me is it's a job that can use my artistic skills that I'm not as personally invested in.
Mhm.
Like the way I would like here in New Zealand, you call it like being a tradie, where it's like you like a sparky or a carpenter or something like that, where it's this job where you're making something for someone, but it's not necessarily a total expression of your artistic identity, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
The analogy that I use a lot is like, say you're a chair carpenter and someone comes to you and they're like, hey, I want this chair for this purpose. And you can, because you've made so many chairs, say, hey, this is the best chair that's gonna fit your needs. But they can turn around and go like, nope, I want it to be a yoga ball or like
Uh-huh.
something
Uh-huh.
completely different, right? And you can then, as a graphic designer, your job is just kind of give them what they want. Uh, so
Yeah.
it's like, well, I've given you the best advice, but I'll give you what you want. And I think if it was, maybe if I had gone into animation or something like that, I would have gotten burned out really quickly because it would have been much more of like your passionate personal ideas that someone is then saying, no, I don't want that. Versus with graphic design, I have a bit more of that separation of all right, this is a product that I'm making for you, for you to give me money. So,
That makes
yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, so while working, I guess, as a graphic designer, I guess I did have other ideas. One idea I had, which I don't know, maybe someday I'll still explore. I've always liked the kind of murder mystery framework, because
Mm-hmm.
essential to Dominion is this starting murder mystery. So I had this idea of, I don't know if you ever heard the myth of East of the Sun, West of the Moon. It's like a
I have not.
Finnish Yeah, so it's like a Finnish Russian myth, and I always loved it as a kid. And it's one of the ones where like the girl saves the prince, which was really
Mm-hmm.
nice. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So, I don't. One of the ideas that I was sitting there like mulling over, like that nearly became a comic before Dominion, was a setup of that where it's like because basically in the myth, the it's a bit of like Cupid Psyche-esque where the prince is turned into this bear
Mm-hmm.
and Carpenter's daughter helps save him and then he's like Beauty and the Beast, you're mine now, you live in my castle.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit more, it's less Beauty and the Beast with like the kidnapping. It's more of a like, hey, do you want to come live in my castle? It's an interesting myth because you can tell all the different stories that like build it, right? Like you can see Cupid and Psyche, you can see a bit of like Beauty and the Beast, all that kind of stuff. But basically the prince is cursed by this troll queen and uh in a year she's coming to collect him unless, someone falls in love with him or that kind of thing. And it's like right at the year mark and or no, it's not that that's the Beauty of the Beast one. The myth is that no one can see his true form because at night he turns back into a human. That's right, sorry. So again, once again, you see Cupid and Psyche versus Beauty and the Beast kind of coming together in the story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so then the last day before he would have been free from the curse and they would have been free to marry or whatever, her sisters convinced her to go look and see what his form looks like at night. And so then he gets spirited away by the Troll Queen. But then instead of just being like, oh no, this is sad, she goes on this quest basically to find and kill the Troll Queen to get her boyfriend back. So yeah,
Nice.
yeah, that's the myth. So I was gonna do what I wanted to do was a little less of the romance come live with me setup is more of like she discovers this castle full of these like stone statues and there's this
Mm-hmm.
bear that like lives in the castle and she's trying to figure out like what's happened like I kind of liked more the mystery aspect of like figuring out what has happened if you stumble upon this magical castle full of frozen statues and a bear that has this what you think is a ghost that roams the halls at night so so that was the idea I nearly went with. Um, but there were a few like story points that I just couldn't figure out. So that's why maybe someday I'll go back to it. But like there was a few like little plot points where I just couldn't find a satisfying answer to it when I was thinking on
Mm-hmm.
it. So I just, never fully committed. Just did like a few concept sketches, things like that. Never did like a full proper script write, things like that.
Love
But for
it.
Dominion, yeah. Dominion, I started instead of like being like, this is the story framework and this is what I want to work with, I started with a character. So
Good.
Dominion started with Pasha, and it was in response to a lot of, traumatic personal things that had happened in my life, and something I was going through at the time. And it was one of those things of like I had heard told me over and over that to be a strong woman, there's really only like two acceptable ways, like at least in corporate settings or whatever. You have to be either the ice queen that doesn't show any emotion. You have to be like purely ruled by logic, like because if anyone accuses you of being hysterical or having feelings like it works against you, you have to be just completely stone cold. Or the only other way is then to like be a mother type, which like you appeal to people, through empathy and, you know, kind of babying them, I guess, to be like, oh, it's not too
Mm,
bad, like it'll be all right. And if you kind of fall out of these two specific ways, people just don't take you seriously as a leader if you're a woman. They'll be like, oh, she's
right.
too emotional, or, oh, she's, works on this, too hard, or like she's
Right.
trying too hard. She's a try hard, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So I really railed against that, where I was like, surely we have to have a space that like women can feel rage and passion, and you have these deep feelings and not have to sit here and smother them or codify them to the people around them. Um, and so Pasha came from that, where it's this the kind of core idea I had was a female John Wick, where it's this idea of
Nice.
like someone that's hit that breaking point and is just no holds barred going to go for what she wants. But in the same way, like again, in writing, usually you see like the Kill Bill type who's, suddenly becomes, super ice cold, or, that kind of thing. I
Right.
wanted to make a character that feel like her power essentially comes from her feeling and wanting things so intensely. It's not that she's turned herself off. She's just, I guess, turned herself on. I suppose she's very incredibly engaged in what she's doing and
Mm.
feels incredibly strongly about it. Um, so yeah, that's how Pasha started. And then from there, the rest of the story kind of came together. So
I love the fantasy and mythological influences. I love the just the psychology of digging into a character, which you obviously dig into and really carefully think through all of the elements. So really enjoying the architecture that you're talking about.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Yeah, because in the
Hmm.
story, so in the world of Dominion, as far as the power system and how that works, like I also wrote a bit of a unique magic system to kind of drive that narrative.
Hmm.
Um, where so in Dominion, magical power, like if you've ever played a video game and they like one of the stats is willpower. And I always thought that was like a really like strange way to describe it. I guess essentially magic defense. But like I was like, why willpower? Why do we always say this, but it kind of doesn't have a deeper meaning? So I wanted to make a magic system where essentially all magic is will. It's if you want to make a joke out of it, it's a manifesting board. It's like, it's like it's you have to actualize and want something that badly, essentially, for magic to happen. Um, and in this world, magic is tied to like being part of the cosmos, which is like think like God or the all of reality.
Hmm.
So the cosmos in the beginning, the cosmos exists and looks out into the void and sees nothing. And so then the cosmos starts parting itself, pulling out its eyes because it's made of all these divine eyes. Um, and it makes these lords. So then the lords create creation through will. And it's that idea of create, like seeing and wanting, and like that creates, like that, to have that power. So that's a very direct visual symbolism that I'm going for, where it's having these eyes gives you that ability to cast magic, to actualize, to create. Um, so, and then through the mythology, again, basically some of the lords come into conflict, several of them get cast down into hell and become devils. Um, because the big conflict they had is I'm trying not to, how do I say without spoiling too much? Because like part of that is the plot, like the core of the thing. But essentially
Hmm.
that what most people know in the world is that the devils created death.
Uh-huh.
And that was the thing that like, it was kind of like throwing their toys, being like, if I can't have it my way, you know, nothing gets to exist. We'll return to the void. So the lords that remain after they cast down the devils, they still can't figure out a way to beat death. And so again, kind of like the cosmos, they piece themselves out and each sentient creation gets this divine eye. Um, and then therefore magic kind of enters into everyone's everyday world. So you can either, because you have this divine eye that's linked to this, divine power, you can be a siphon, which is the type where you're like, if you imagine like a funnel, you're a vehicle for the will of the Lord that you're borrowing power from. Um,
Hmm.
so you can't do anything that that Lord wouldn't want you to do because the Lord has to like want it as well.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
he's like you're not going to be able to use your powers for evil if you're being a siphon in that way unless you then the other thing you can do is you can sell your divine eye to a devil and then you can use your power however really you want because
Mm.
they don't have a problem with most things you would do, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but then the third way, which is the way that Pasha is like you everyone does have their own divine eye, right? And she capitalizes on that and is able to cast and use the bit of divine power she has independently, essentially.
Uh,
And it's much more limited than because these external beings who have all these many more eyes, right? Like, much more
hmm.
power to manifest. So she has to be really intelligent about how she uses it. Um, but yeah, that's how she casts. And so she's called a conjurer. Um, because it's that same
Very
idea of
cool.
like creating and conjuring and like making something into being. So,
Yeah, yeah. No, again, so many details and so many
mhm.
layers here. So I was just looking through
Mhm.
the copy that you sent me and enjoying
Yeah.
the beauty of what you created on the page, but then you also have
Mhm.
engaged in this really deep sense of world building as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's
Hmm. Hmm.
the first beginning place for the story is a city called Blackbridge. And Blackbridge is this walled city state. It's a mercantile town mostly, trade center. It has these like old mines and even it's I'm the type of nerd where even the type of stone that the city is built on is going to be part of the plot later.
Hmm.
Like, the balance of different types of stone and like what kind of industry that is and what's the geographical layout of the city that then also plays into the class system. Because if you think about like it's kind of easy, like you can imagine like a fantasy city on a hill or something, right? But back in the olden times before cars and transport, you know, who has the money to haul all of that stuff uphill, right? Like, so everywhere that is, closer to ground, like the port area, is your more lower class area. Things are built more shoddily, things like that, because it's much more easy to transport material to that area versus if you go up the city map, there's a map in the back of the book. As you go up kind of the tiers of the city is, increasingly wealthy, right? So because they can afford staff and people to haul all of this stuff from the port all the way up to the top of the island. So,
Interesting, interesting. Now,
yeah.
you mentioned your background in graphic design.
Mhm.
Anything you'd like to say about how you connected with comics and decided that this would be a comic graphic novel approach?
So the main thing for me, I did consider just writing a novel version of it because comics take forever. Comics take so much time. Uh, but the thing that made me really decide that I wanted this to be a comic, absolutely, was the first scene where Pasha is robbed on the road, essentially. Um, that was so vivid in my mind that it was like just like a movie. And I was like, I can't like to put words to it is almost harder than to just sit and to draw it and like, and just how I can see it so clearly. And there's several scenes like that where I can just see I can see it so well. Um, and so I just can't really think of a way other than comics that I'd want to show it because it's like I just want you to see through my eyes. I want you to see exactly what, this looks like. Um, yeah. So maybe it's a perfectionist controlling streak. I don't know, but it's
That is one of the
yeah,
things about comics, right? You have the
yeah.
ability to go in, and some people do them collaboratively, but
Hmm.
you can tell the story, and you have the tools, and they're all right there if
Hmm.
you know how to use them.
Yeah, yeah. And it's kind of got that nice balance as well of like if you're watching a film or something like that, the drawback of film is that it doesn't have the same character interiority that you can get in a novel. Like
Oh,
and comics, we take a lot from film, like we learn a lot from film, but I think it's a really good balance of that as well, though, where you really do kind of balance between that novel interiority, inner thoughts being put on the page and drawn and expressed versus showing and and having people see the environment and how you're putting together a composition or someone's expression in a panel and how you can fine tune it to express exactly how you want, at least if you're having a good art day. Bad art days, sometimes you're just like, it's good enough. But yeah, I think it's a really cool, you get kind of the best of both worlds, in my opinion, where you can, because in film it's kind of unnatural to go into like a thought bubble, right? Like some you can,
mhm.
depending, like Fight Club, you kind of, it depends on how you frame it, right? So Fight
Yeah.
Club is like a good example of how you have high interiority because you have the narration character.
Hmm.
But that's also not your typical setup, like it's very intentionally set up because it's all about his perception, right? Like that's the whole
Yeah.
crux of the plot.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So there are ways you can build it into film. I'm not saying that film doesn't give the same interiority. You can build it in, but it takes more intentional structuring to do it that way.
Yeah.
Versus in novels, you kind of expect it. You expect to hear what the person's thinking or, feeling. So,
Oh, yeah. Definitely not the common avenue in film for sure.
yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah. Now, I know you started this in 2021, you said,
mhm,
on lockdown, and I know that we're
mhm,
currently recording in 2025. So you're talking about those art days in between. I'm curious
mhm.
about the process. What is your process like, and what has that been like digging into this visual world?
So for me, my process, usually I'll start with thumbnails, or well, I guess technically in the big lockdown, I sat and I wrote the entire series.
Mm,
So I wrote the full script even. So there's three main arcs that the series is going to be. It'll be about 15 books by the time it's done. So
nice.
it's a long-term investment. Um,
Yeah.
but I'm looking forward to it. And I think it's one of those things of that's the other thing I like about comics is I don't know, you don't have to limit it to like an hour or, that or one book, to get through. You can kind of take your time to explore and show.
Mm,
Not that you want to be terribly slow about things, but like it's always a balance. But yeah, you get more opportunity to sit with the characters more, um, and get to learn a bit more about the world around them, instead of thinking like, okay, within 200 pages or, within 1 hour, that kind of thing.
yeah.
Um, so sorry, back to the process.
No, you're
So
good. You were
start,
fine.
yeah, yeah. So starting with a script. Lately I find I actually have to edit my scripts a lot from when I first wrote them because I'm a bit of a verbose writer. I and the biggest limitation with comics is lettering. Just the sheer amount of space that dialogue takes on a page. Like you don't think it'll be a problem, but it is.
Oh
It is
yeah,
such a big
yeah.
problem. Things like I've given the example of if you say and it's hard to preserve character voice through it because say I have a posh character and I want them to say truncate, like, oh, you should truncate that or something. Um, Shorter is only shorter by 2 letters, but on a page that can actually be incredibly important because just
Uh-huh,
the physical
uh-huh.
space that those 2 letters take. And so often from my initial draft that I wrote back in 2021, I have to kind of go through and be like, what's a way that I can lower the character count on this
Hmm.
dialogue, but still maintain the character tone of voice? Because the last thing you want with a comic is to open it up and then just this wall of text. You know?
Right, right.
Yeah, it has to, and it's a trap that I think some people do fall into, especially when they're trying to give exposition or things like that. And sometimes you can't really avoid it. Like I have a page where they're discussing the murder case. That's kind of the central starting point of the series. Um, and it is kind of a big picture spread with lots of text on it. I hope that I balance out a nice balance of pretty picture and text, but it's one of those things of you just can't really get away with not discussing some of these details. So you have a lot more text on that page than I'd normally like to put on a page. Um,
For what it's
but
worth, from the reader side, I've read a lot of comics, and there was no page where I was like, "Oh, this is a lot of words." I've had that experience in comics before, but I didn't get that from your work. So, for what
oh,
that's
thank you.
worth, as a reader,
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's I work hard on it. It's
yeah,
something I'm very
yeah,
cognizant of.
yeah.
So yeah, so then I will take this original script and just kind of go through it. And my very first pass is I'll do like a really low fidelity thumbnail, and I can send some pictures of it. You would not believe that I can draw with any kind of ability if you see my thumbnails. They look they they are hot garbage. But the main point is just to get like the movement through the page, kind of nailing down where I want the camera in the scene. Because when you're working with comics, similarly to film, you have to have this really clear idea of where the camera is and where the characters are, because
Mhm.
it's this rule called the 180 rule, where
Yes.
if you show, let's say, Desmond on the left hand panel or left side of the panel and Pasha on the right side of the panel, you pretty much have to keep the camera on that side of them until you give a very good reason for the camera to like a motivated move for the camera. And usually combined with like a background shot that shows like gives the reader a different anchoring point in the composition so that they can understand where the characters are in space. Because if
Mhm.
you just flip it back and forth willy-nilly, it can feel really disorienting reading it. And you're
Yeah.
like, wait, wait. And it's the same with film, because if the and sometimes you can use it on purpose, right? If you want the viewer to feel intentionally disoriented, like if it's a dream sequence or a nightmare or something like that, like you can use it with intent. But usually it can just get very distracting unless you follow that rule and you kind of move your camera around the characters in this kind of 180 side of them, and you can make it so it's like over one shoulder looking at Desmond and you just see the back of Pasha's head, or vice versa. You can get really flexible with it, but it's that idea of not flipping what side of the panel they're on so that the reader can keep track of where they are in space.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so the thumbnail pass is mostly about that, for me. And like, especially if like, okay, in this panel, I want Desmond to be feeling insecure. So maybe I'm going to go for a high angle because usually if you're looking down on a character, it kind of gives that feeling of insecurity versus if, looking up, it makes the character feel dominant and in control, all these kind of subtle ways that you can indicate mood and feeling. So it's more just kind of like a camera angle map. So literally like Desmond is mostly like a Dorito in most of my thumbnails. And Pasha looks like a Goomba. It's
Nice.
just kind
Yeah.
of, yeah, it's very rough as guts, as we would say in New Zealand. But yeah, so with the thumbnail pass, and I usually do it at a really small scale, I'll pull that into InDesign and I'll letter then because I have already in the past been like, oh, I'll just handwrite in what the dialogue is, and that'll be about what the font size is and it'll be fine. No, it's not fine. I've had to redraw panels because there's
Uh,
just not enough room for the text. So I always like I lay the dialogue first, after that thumbnail passed so that I can know exactly how much space I need to give the text. Um, and then from there, I pull it into Procreate, and then I'll do like the pencil pass, inks, color, all of that. Um, and then pull it back into InDesign, do any fine tuning with the text. Sometimes, like, I'll make a bubble one way, but as I'm penciling, I'm like, it'd be better if I can move this text around. So then I'll just adjust the bubble slightly. Um, so, and then, yeah, and then that's a chapter. And I'll go through, yeah. Yeah. I
and you said
generally,
how? Oh, sorry. Go
sorry,
ahead.
okay. So I generally try to do like a single, like I'll do the whole chapter at one stage, simply
Hmm.
because if something's bothering me or if I want to change something, it's a lot easier at the pencil stage, right? To be like, no, I need to rework this page or it's not looking right. Than if I go page by page and then I fully inked and colored a page and all that work's already done. And then I'm like, crap, this isn't working, right? So yeah, so I do tend to like I'll do the pencil pass and I'll, look at the whole chapter in the pencil pass. And then I'll do the inks pass and then I'll look again, um, just in case there's like fine tuning. I can liquify tool saves my life. Yeah, yeah, I feel like
Oh
so I
yeah.
don't have to redraw it. Um, and yeah, and so I tend to do it that way. And that's another thing that can help save you from heartbreak a bit as long as you just take it through steps. Because if you sleep on things, take some time, like it's always you'll see things to fix, um,
Hmm.
or things to fine tune. So mm.
At a certain point, you have to say it is finished. It is ready.
Yes, that is true. That is, I think, the hardest part for me is that like done is better than perfect. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so reaching that point where it's just like, you know what, it's good enough. Not every panel, and that's the other thing with comics, not every panel has to be a masterpiece. Not every panel has to like, not every panel is going to hold the weight of the story, you know? Um, so like for example, with the book edition, I did a lot of redraws and I did a lot of like structural reworks. Like chapter 3 for the book looks completely different than the one that I initially posted online.
Mm-hmm.
And
Hmm.
to me, like it had always bothered me, so like I knew it was something that needed to be done. And then so when I got the grant to create the book, I hired on an editor and they just kind of confirmed that like gut feeling I'd always had.
Hmm.
Um, so that's why I did went and did all those reworks. But like chapter 2 is still mostly the same. I think there's like one extra page added and just a few small adjustments. And there's some panels in chapter 2 that like me as the artist I am now, I just like I hate them. I'm just like, oh, we're not
Right.
gonna like some are still good, but like some of them, like there's particular one panel of Desmond that I look at him like it's this weird thing as an artist where you draw a character and like it can look like the character, but there's drawings that really feel like the character and you're just like, yes, that is in my brain, that's Desmond. Like that drawing just that is Desmond. That is what he looks like. And then you draw him in a different panel and it's like it's still him, but like it's not like there's just something like an uncanny valley, I guess. Like something is off, or like is it the space between the eyes? Is it, the way I've shaped his face in that panel. There's just something that makes it like for you as the creator, just something that makes it not quite right. And Desmond in that panel is just not he's fine and it's not that important of a panel. And I just had to tell myself like, no, just leave it. Done is better than perfect. You already have a lot of reworks to do. Um, and yeah, it's just one of those things of yeah, that panel of Desmond will probably haunt me forever, but yeah, I'll just be like, it's not that important. It's fine. Just, keep the story going. And it's important as an artist as well to keep the story going because while I was doing the reworks, I found I was getting really burnt out. Um, because I had already, so the very first, so after 2022, I started drawing the series. And I had started on chapter one, and chapter one, of course, used to look really different. It started with like Desmond in his bedroom, walking downstairs until, so the scene in chapter two actually happened in chapter one in like the original version.
Oh.
Um, and but as I was working on that, um, the webtoon call to action contest came out. And I was like, oh, I'll try to enter that. And so I jumped to chapter three, which had the action scene. And so I did my first pass at that. And then I got the feedback from that. And I was like, okay, well, I'll make the changes and I'll fix up some things. And so chapter three ended up getting split into chapter three and four because it was just a
Mm.
lot of content for one chapter, all this stuff. Um, and then went finally properly launched the series online in 2023. And so then when I got the grant in 2024, I was at that point, that was like the third pass at chapter three, essentially. So I was just
Oh.
getting so tired of doing the same scene like over and over again. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so it was just so invigorating to finally, once I got those reworks done, to get onto new chapters was just like, yes, we're getting somewhere.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I'm
So I
sure.
think, yeah. So I think it's really important because a lot of comic creators can kind of fall into this redraw hell, is what a lot of people call it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because as you work on comics, it's just inevitable that you just keep getting better. Because you're drawing so much more than you used to. You're drawing the same thing over and over again. You just keep getting better. And then you can sit there and look at your beginning chapter and you're like, oh, that's my first impression. And it's not as good as I am now. It's not as accomplished. I've learned so much. Surely I should go back and redo it and make it look good. And, then of course you get better again. And then you're looking at you're like, oh no, now I've got to redo it again. So a
Yeah.
lot of people get burnt out with that process. So if anyone else listening is a comic creator, I would just really encourage you. Like for the book, I did end up doing some of the redraws just simply because it had always bothered me. And I was like, all right, this will be my last hard look at it. And I really wanted it to be, because I got the grant from Creative New Zealand, like I wanted to do New Zealand proud.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so like that was kind of my driving force of doing the redraws. And um yeah, I would just say mostly, unless you have like a print edition or something that's like a big occasion like that can really give you a good reason to go and redo and rework. Um, I would say the biggest thing with comics is just to keep going, and just I think a lot of readers even like seeing the growth. Like they like to
Hmm.
see where you start and then see how your art gets better.
Hmm.
And even professionals, like if you look at Full Metal Alchemist from Arakawa, like it is just inevitable. It is just part of the medium, and just accept it. Like, don't get yourself trapped in drawing and drawing and drawing the same scene. Get the story out. That's what people are reading. So,
That's right. That's right.
yeah.
And you have a long creative journey ahead. There's a to be continued at the end. Um,
Mm.
Anywhere that people can go to find out more about the book, to support and find out more about your work.
So I have a website, memohcomics.com. It's MEMOH comics.com. I'm also on Instagram, MEMOH full stop comics. Um, and those are my most trafficked online areas. So if you follow me there. And yeah, they'll have any updates. The plan is for the series moving forward. So I'm hoping to put out a book about once a year, knock on
Hmm.
wood, as long as I can stay on schedule. Um, and so for volume one, that's coming out in New Zealand on 21 May, but internationally for you guys on 11 June. Uh,
hmm hmm
and then uh, I think starting in August or September, what I'll do is I will post the book version online in drops. So the final kind of version on Webtoon. And then the series from there, I'm going to do in black and white, and I'll save color for any print editions because it's just one of those like I really love the inking phase. Color
Yeah,
as much as like I love it when it's done, but I think a lot of times I'm just like so tired by the time I get through the inking phase. And honestly, I love black and white comics. Like I adore them. So the going to black and white for the new chapters, and then people can look forward to those being in color for the print editions, and that'll
very
go
smart
from there.
in the
Yeah.
creative work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, many thanks for the time. Many thanks for the conversation. I would love to have you back sometime again to talk about kind of the next stages in the process and where the journey is going. And yeah, I appreciate having the chance to look through the work.
Oh, thank you so much. I'd love to come back. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
especially like there's the comic side and the world building side, and then when you're doing this kind of self-pub, there's this whole other world of things you have to learn as a
hmm
creator. And yeah, it's super fascinating stuff to talk about. So maybe next time we'll chat about that.
Yeah,
So
would love that. May the conversation
yeah,
continue and
yeah.
best of all things in the creative journey to you.